Professor Clixandra had designed the perfect xenobiology experiment. For the past century, she had used the same controlled ecosystem to teach her students about interspecies adaptation and survival dynamics. The terrarium contained a carefully balanced selection of moderately dangerous flora and fauna from 12 different worlds. Nothing too lethal, but challenging enough to demonstrate evolutionary principles. Her students typically observed from the safety of the laboratory, while various test subjects were introduced to the environment. The crystalline observers would document behavioral changes. The gaseous analyticals would measure atmospheric responses. The hive-mind collectives would process adaptation patterns. It was orderly, predictable, and academically sound. Then the human exchange student volunteered to be the test subject. "Absolutely not," Professor Clixandra had declared, her bioluminescent patches flashing in patterns that indicated academic horror. "Student Thompson, this is a scientific observation exercise, not a survival challenge." David Thompson, a cheerful young xenobiology major from Earth, had smiled with that peculiar human expression that other species found both endearing and slightly unsettling. "Professor, wouldn't direct human participation provide more valuable data than observing captive specimens? I mean, if we're studying adaptation, shouldn't we study how a sapient species actually adapts?" The logic was sound, even if the implications were terrifying. Now, 6 hours later, Professor Clixandra watched in growing amazement as her carefully designed ecosystem underwent transformations that her models had never predicted. "Student Veltar," she addressed a young crystalline whose geometric form was pulsing with excitement, "please provide your current observations." "Professor," Veltar chimed, "the human has fundamentally altered 13 separate ecological relationships. The thorn creepers from Epsilon Eridani, which typically kill small organisms through toxic spines, are now providing the human with fruit." Professor Clixandra's head tentacles writhed with confusion. "That's impossible. Thorn creepers are aggressive carnivorous plants. They don't produce fruit." "They do now," added Zixfera, a gaseous student whose form shimmered with analytical excitement. "The humans somehow convinced them to enter a symbiotic relationship. He removes parasites from their root systems, and they've developed specialized nutrient pods specifically for him." Through the observation dome, Professor Clixandra watched as David casually walked past a pack of razor-toothed stalkers, predators that had terrorized 3 different galactic sectors before being contained for research purposes. The creatures were following him like devoted pets. "The stalkers," she said weakly, "are they domesticated?" "Not domesticated," corrected Morphgeth, a shape-shifting student whose current form resembled an academic anxiety attack. "They've formed a hunting partnership. The human identifies prey through methods we can't quantify. The stalkers execute the hunt, and they share the results. He's teaching them strategy," added Veltar with something approaching awe. "Watch this." On the display, David was gesturing to the stalkers, apparently explaining something. The predators listened with what could only be described as rapt attention, their heads tilting in ways that suggested genuine comprehension. "Impossible," Professor Clixandra muttered. "Razor-toothed stalkers have neural complexity barely above automated hunting responses. They can't learn complex behaviors." "They couldn't," Zixfera corrected. "But the human is somehow stimulating neuroplasticity in their brain tissues. They're literally becoming more intelligent through interaction with him." Professor Clixandra felt her academic worldview crumbling as she watched David approach the terrarium's most dangerous inhabitant, a shadow manta from the void reaches, a creature that existed partially in normal space and partially in subspace dimensions. It was virtually untouchable by conventional means, and had never shown interest in any form of communication. David sat down cross-legged in front of the creature and began making soft, rhythmic sounds. The shadow manta, which had ignored every stimulus for the past 40 years, slowly materialized more fully into normal space and settled beside him. "He's singing to it," whispered Morphgeth in disbelief. "Define singing," Professor Clixandra demanded. "Melodic vocalizations with no apparent linguistic content," Beltar translated. "But the creature is responding to harmonic frequencies in ways that suggest emotional engagement." "Emotions?" Professor Clixandra's patches went completely dark. "Shadow mantas don't have emotions. They barely have consciousness." "They do now," Zixfera observed. "The human seems to be awakening cognitive and emotional responses in species that were previously thought incapable of such development." Professor Clixandra watched as David gently stroked the shadow manta's partially corporeal surface. The creature produced a sound that could only be described as purring, a behavior never documented in any xenobiological literature. "Professor," Beltar chimed hesitantly, "should we be concerned that the human is accidentally uplifting every species in the terrarium to higher levels of consciousness?" "Accidentally?" Professor Clixandra's voice cracked across multiple harmonic frequencies. "You think this is accidental?" She activated her emergency protocols and sent a priority message to the university administration, requesting immediate consultation with the Department of Evolutionary Ethics. "Human exchange student has potentially triggered accelerated consciousness evolution in controlled xenobiological specimens. Recommend review of all human interaction protocols immediately." Through the observation dome, David waved cheerfully at the cameras, now surrounded by a peaceful gathering of previously hostile creatures who seemed to have discovered friendship, cooperation, and possibly the meaning of joy. Professor Clixandra began drafting her resignation letter. Some discoveries, she realized, were too significant for one academic to bear alone.